Hi. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. Thanks for coming out tonight, Saturday night. Hope you guys enjoyed the talk so far. So I probably have the easiest job in Reflections Projections, writing his bio, because when he was 14, Aaron Swartz created RSS, and then after graduating from Stanford, he went on to be a co-founder of Reddit. So he's done you've probably used something that he's coded at some point. Since then, he's worked on projects such as watchdog.net, Demand Progress, Open Library, and the Progressive Change Campaign Committee, which raised over $1 million in its first year. So when he tells you about social responsibility, you can be sure that he's doing it. So, thank you.
Can folks hear me? There we go. Okay, so I'm going to talk, but feel free to just interrupt me at any time. I can't really see, so don't bother raising your hand to ask a question. Just shout at me, and hopefully we can make it more of a dialogue than me just giving a long presentation. So imagine that you are walking to work, because you live in a city where you can walk to work, and you pass a shallow pond, and you look out at the pond, and you see the beautiful blue water, but you also see a child in the pond, and as you look carefully, you notice the child is drowning. And you're faced with this choice. You can either rush in, try and save the child. It's a shallow pond, so you'll be perfectly safe, but you could save the child at the cost of maybe getting your shoes muddy, maybe being a couple minutes late to work, or you can just keep on walking, go to your office, not have to worry about it, and let the child die. So, raise of hands. Who would let the child die? Come on, be honest. And who would rush in and try and save them? All right. So this question was first posed by the philosopher Peter Singer, and his argument, which he continues to make to this day, is that obviously we would all rush in and save the child if we were walking by a pond, and yet at the same time that we all say this, there are millions of children dying in third world countries where the cost of saving them really isn't much more than the cost of buying new shoes or, missing a couple minutes of work. There's all sorts of easily available treatments, simple medicines, antiretrovirals, pills, improved sanitation, wells, all sorts of things that would save real children's lives, and yet we are happy to spend money on $300 shoes, and very rarely do we donate that money to Oxfam instead. And so the question he asked is, what's the difference in principle? Now, the first time I heard this analogy, I thought it was crazy. I thought, surely there's a difference in principle. A child is right there, and the other child is really far away, but that doesn't actually make a moral difference. So then I thought, well, maybe it's, only I'm walking by the pond, whereas anybody could go and save the child in the third world country. But I think also, if everybody else was just walking past the pond, would it really make it okay to just keep walking and let the child drown? So eventually, after struggling with this for quite a while, and Peter Singer has a new book out, The Life You Can Save, that goes through all of the possible ways people try and evade this, I eventually concluded that he was basically correct, even if it is kind of uncomfortable. And what I try and do is I try and think back and say, what's the principle involved? Why is it that this makes sense? And I think the reason is because when you see a child drowning in a pond, you can do something of extreme importance. You can save a child's life. You can do good in the world at very little cost to yourself. The cost of your shoes, the cost of being a couple minutes late to work, a cost that in the scheme of things isn't very large. And when you have that choice, when you have the choice of making a big positive difference weighed against a small personal cost, obviously you should go and make the big positive difference. Now, the reason I'm talking about this at a computer conference is it reminds me of another parable, the parable that kind of launched the field of social responsibility in computer science. We can call it the parable of the printer. So instead of Singer's parable of the pond, we have Stallman's parable of the printer. You may have heard this I'm probably getting some of the details wrong, but the story is roughly this. Richard Stallman worked at MIT's Artificial Intelligence Lab, and it was the good old days when, there were huge computers and huge printers, and the AI lab had just acquired a new printer. But unfortunately, they didn't have drivers for the printer. They had gotten the drivers from the printer company, and the printer company, in exchange for the drivers, wanted the AI lab to sign a contract promising not to share those drivers with anyone else. And Stallman thought about this, and he said, well, obviously I can't promise to do that. Giving someone else a printer driver, giving them this piece of software, it's something that costs me nothing, but is of enormous value to them. All of a sudden they are able to print. So why would I contract away my ability to do this? It would be like signing away my right to rush into a pond and save a child. Obviously I should rush into the pond. Obviously I should share this software. How can I possibly engage in a contract that would prevent me from doing that? And so instead, being a computer programmer, he sat and wrote his own version of the printer driver. And that was the beginning of this whole model of writing free software versions of otherwise proprietary programs. Now notice the similarity in both cases. We are privileged people who can provide something of great value to others. We can save a child from a pond. We can give someone free software. But we can only do it at some cost to ourselves. We lose our shoes. Stallman maybe had to lose a day of work writing this printer driver. It costs us something personally, but it's still our responsibility to do it because the benefits are so great. And in Peter Singer's case, this is part of his more general theory of utilitarianism. So the basic idea of utilitarianism, and the reason I think it probably appeals to programmers, is it's kind of a mathematical theory of ethics. It says you weigh up all the benefits on one side and all the harms on the other side, and what you should do is what maximizes the benefits minus the harms. So on any given decision, any ethical decision, you don't think about whether it's good for you or whether it's good for your friend or your family. You think about whether it's good for the world as a whole. Obviously, if you take the benefit of saving a child's life and you subtract the cost of your shoes, you should take that action. You should save the child's life. The benefit to the world as a whole makes it worth making that choice. Now, as programmers, we have sort of special abilities. We almost have a magic power. Instead of walking by people who are drowning in ponds, we walk by people doing a repetitive action over and over again. Have you ever had this experience? This happens to me all the time. I see someone sitting in Paint Shop Pro or renaming some file over and over again, doing some completely ridiculous repetitive activity. I saw someone the other day, they wanted to convert a bunch of files from one image format to another image format. And the way they decided to do this was they had, a directory with 100 files in them. They would double-click the file. They would go to File, Save As. They would change it from PNG to JPEG, and then they would hit Save. And they kept doing this for all 100 files, right? And this is, it sounds crazy, but this is the way normal people think, right? They're like, I have a program that saves a file as another format. Like, I have to just do it 100 times, and I'm just going to suck it up. I was able to walk along, and I'm sure most of you are able to walk along and say, here's one line of shell script that solves your problem. Like, you type this in, boom, it's like magic. All of a sudden, all of this work no longer needs to be done. I mean, imagine if you could do this in real life. Imagine you were walking by a shop and you saw someone down on their hands and knees scrubbing the floor, and you were like, oh, that's crazy. I'll just say expecto limpiorum, and boom, the floor scrubs itself, right? That, it's like straight out of Harry Potter. And yet, this is a skill we all have. It's a magical ability we all have that we take for granted. We just think, of course, we should all be able to do this. Even to the person hitting File and Save, it seems like this incredible magic. But with great power comes great responsibility. And we need to think about the good that we can do with this magical ability. We need to think about, from a utilitarian perspective, what's the great good we can achieve in the world at small cost to ourselves. So that's the question I want to face today, and I want to address it with 4 examples. The first example has to do with doing no harm. Another thing we have as geeks is this ability to get swept away by an interesting problem. XKCD has this comic about nerd swiping. You show a geek a funny thing, and they'll get so distracted by it that they won't notice that you're running over them with a van. But it's not just a funny XKCD joke. It has real serious consequences. Probably the most famous example of nerd swiping would be the atomic bomb. Here you had a whole bunch of really famous, talented, brilliant physicists all coming together, working on this really exciting, interesting, hard problem, putting all their effort into it, going out, living in the middle of the desert, staying away from their families and their friends, not telling anyone what they were working on, day and night, creating this thing, and at the end of it, it goes off and kills an untold number of people and creates this huge problem that's still with us today, that we're still constantly in fear of the whole world being blown up because they all decided to have a good time and work on this interesting problem. Now, obviously, as programmers, we don't usually find ourselves building nuclear weapons, but we do find ourselves working on what could be called evil things broadly. Just at conferences, I've spoken to people who've gotten excited about using Lisp to make more efficient spyware, or another person using Lisp to create drones that more effectively targeted human faces, right? Like, literally writing software that would rain fire down on the skies on unsuspected people in Afghanistan. But they don't think about it that way. They think, oh, this is a really interesting problem. Facial recognition is really hard, and with the drones and the altitude, and you get so swept up in it, you don't really think about it. Matt Knox gave a talk after I told him he was using Lisp to do evil. He sat and thought about it, and he gave a talk about how he got swept away in it. He worked at this spyware company, and they said, look, we want to build this software that, gets installed on people's computers and pops up Windows every so often. This is okay, it's not the best thing in the world. That's kind of reasonable, but, other people do it, so I'll go along with it. And then they said, okay, we also want you to go around and kill all the other spyware on the computer. And he's like, well, now this I can really get behind, because those other guys, those are awful, right? And I'm writing software that will delete them, so I'm really actually helping people. And then he said, now we want you to close the bugs in Windows that let spyware get installed. Find all the security holes, shut them down. He's like, this is great. This is so fantastic. Like, I'm actually making people's computers more secure. I'm deleting the spyware. And then they, of course, took the last step and said, now we want you to block all the features of Windows that lets anyone remove our spyware. And he was like, well, but by that time he was so far down the path that he did that too. And at the end of it, he had made this completely unremovable spyware that spread itself to all of these computers, and was starting to think, what have I done? It's not a case where he thought about the question. He thought, well, what are the ethics of spyware? Let's weigh the harms and the benefits. Let's do an evaluation. Am I doing something responsible? It's a case where he got swept away in the moment. He just thought it was an interesting problem. He got nerd swiped. He didn't stop to consider the consequences of what he was building. He just got so excited and engaged in building it that was all he thought about. And someone else, that was their responsibility to think about what it meant for the world at large. He's joked in his talk about this that the human mind has a remote root exploit in a large percentage of the installed base. When someone who we think is in charge gives us instructions, our judgment tends to shut off. We start just following orders. There's a famous experiment by a psychologist named Stanley Milgram. You've probably all heard about it. He recruited a whole bunch of random people who lived in New Haven, all ages, all occupations, races, genders, ethnicities, all sorts of things. Brought them into a lab. Sometimes it was at Yale, sometimes it was at an office building, sometimes it was at just something completely nondescript. And he sat them down and said, we're conducting an experiment on memory. And what you need to do is administer a test to this other person who's in another room. And every time they get an answer wrong, give them an electric shock. And every time they get it wrong, up the dosage of the electric shock a little bit. And 80% of the people, they kept upping the dosage of the electric shock, even as they heard the paralyzing screams coming from the other room, even as they heard the guy cry out, my heart, I have a heart condition. Even as they heard the guy, keel over and stop responding and start flipping on the floor, they kept administering electric shocks. Now, they would tell the guy in the lab coat, I don't think this is really a good idea. This guy sounds like he's in real pain, but the guy in the lab coat would say, the experiment requires you continue, and that would be the end of it. And I think we see the same thing as programmers. It's, you can imagine Matt Knox in the same kind of scenario. I don't think this is such a good idea. And like, the experiment requires you continue. And that's why it's even scarier for programmers, because imagine if, these people who are administering electric shocks, they didn't really enjoy it, right? Like, there's video of it, and you can see their contorted faces. They really feel uncomfortable about pressing the button, and they're always looking over at the guy in the lab coat to make themselves feel better. But someone like Matt Knox, they don't even do that. They feel great. They love solving this problem. It's exciting. It distracts them. They're totally, they stay up all night with their Red Bull and their programming. They throw themselves into it entirely. And they don't even get a chance to stop and think about, am I doing something wrong? So I think it's critical as programmers that we accept this responsibility we have that comes with this amazing power to take a step back, think about the harm that might come from our work. Hopefully for most of you, it's not as blatant as these cases I described. I can't imagine anyone here is working on atomic bombs, although I hear there are some military contractors that employ some of you. But there's subtle harms as well as the more obvious ones. It's really hard to do this kind of critical self-evaluation because obviously we're all biased in our favor. We don't want to think we're evil people. We don't want to think the work we're doing is evil. And so it's especially hard to take that critical distance that's necessary to think about what it is we're actually accomplishing, whether it's doing good or whether it's doing harm. A classic example of a subtle sort of harm that most people don't think about is creating proprietary software. Going back to Stallman, we understand intellectually that it's nicer when people make free software as opposed to unfree software. It's better if they can share the software with their friends, if they can modify it and make it their own, if they can do all of the freedoms that free software supplies. But, on balance, that's really hard to get a job in free software. Maybe I'll just keep making proprietary software. Really, I'm a good person. I'm making something interesting, and I'm going to make a lot of money. And, it's very complicated. But even more subtle than that is, even if for some reason you were one of these crazy people who only worked on free software projects, even that is becoming less important these days. We've all moved far, far away from the AI lab model where we're running full-powered computers and communicating through open protocols. These days, most computing doesn't happen on anybody's laptop. It all happens up in the cloud in this magic space on servers and software that's owned by other people. And this has been a real problem for people who like freedom. And that brings us to our second story, freedom in the cloud. So let's take the case of Gmail. How many people here use Gmail? Yeah, me too. I'll admit it. If I had an email client on my own machine, modifying it is pretty easy. You can add a new filter, you can tweak a feature, add something to the UI, you can go and investigate why the spam detector is on the fritz and why it keeps classifying your friends' emails as spam. And if for some reason you want to change email that's so big it requires changing the entire protocol, well, there are actually processes in place for changing the email protocol. They're not great, they're not super democratic, but you can go to the IETF, make your case, go to other email implementers, try to get them to add new features. And in fact, features have been added to email. Email has changed enormously since it was first invented. And while we can debate how effective these processes are or how fair they are, at least they exist and we can have that debate. It's a question people think about, and in fact, it's a question that exists in the law. So under antitrust law, groups like the IETF, these standards bodies that coordinate among organizations, their immunity from being an antitrust case, as opposed to just being another example of collusion that would be otherwise illegal, depends on them being open, participatory bodies where there is some form of democratic participation, where people can provide input and changes and have votes. That does not exist with Gmail. You can write some grease monkey scripts to add things to the UI, but it really only goes skin deep. If you want to do batch operations, if you want to do the equivalent of the paint shop example where you're opening a bunch of images and saving them as another format, you're likely to get banned by Google for abusing their API. You're hitting it too many times. And if you want to dig in and see why the spam filter is marking all your friends' messages as spam, something that's happened to me, probably has happened to some of you, it's just impossible. You can't see anything about the spam filter. Not only do you not have the source code, even if you did have the source code, it wouldn't really help because all the data is sitting on some other server. And even if you had your portion of the data, it probably wouldn't help because I'm sure the way the spam filter works, it integrates everybody's data. And so you have this inextricably social phenomenon that is deciding how your email works that makes it impossible for you to modify. And of course, there's no democratic procedure for deciding Gmail should have a new feature. I mean, it's Google's way or the highway. There's nobody you can appeal to. There's no board you can petition to. You You could make your own replacement for Gmail and try and get other people to use that, but that's about it. And if you did that, of course, it would be very hard to pull people over. Now, Stallman would say, that's fine, just don't use Gmail. That's what Emacs is for. But what about a site like Facebook, where the whole point of using it is all of the other people who are using Facebook? Now, you can start your own version of Facebook on open protocols, just as Identica and Status.net have done with Twitter, but you'd miss out on all the other people, which is kind of the whole point of using Facebook. Or what about a site like Wikipedia, where literally it's the entire point? Now, Stallman has proposed a decentralized, distributed Wikipedia, where everybody writes their own articles and puts it on their own website and links to whatever other articles they like best, and so somehow magically you'd find the encyclopedia. I don't really understand how it would work. But that's really like the best you can do in a case like Wikipedia, where it's just sort of inextricably social, where the whole point of the software, the whole point of the system is its interaction with other people. And if you want to say on Facebook or Wikipedia, I want a new feature, you can't just go and write your own Wikipedia, as some people have tried, because nobody is going to follow you there. The only way to get a change to Wikipedia is to petition the people in charge of Wikipedia. Now, luckily, Wikipedia is democratic. Luckily, there are procedures on Wikipedia to get things changed. There are people you can petition to. They do listen. It's a not-for-profit. But for the vast majority of these corporations, like Facebook, there is no such attitude. I mean, people can start Facebook petitions and Facebook groups complaining about features, but there's no reason Facebook can or should listen to those, and often, in fact, they do just ignore it. And so there's a question where, is it doing harm to work for a company like Facebook? By building this software, as good as it may be, you're siphoning off value and freedom from all of the people who use it. You're pulling all of their data, all of their social networks, all of their experience, their friends, and centralizing them in one place, owned by one company, with no democratic accountability and no ability for people to change the software or free it. You know, you may be able to get your data, but there is no way you could start your own Facebook and have it be any useful to you in the way that the existing Facebook is. Now, of course, this is on top of the usual stuff about free software and free data, and there are some good people trying to codify principles about what it means for a service to be free, but nobody has really solved this fundamental problem, which is, if we do have these points of centralization, if we do have these services where it only makes sense for one to exist, how do we make that democratic? How do we make that fair? How do we make that an open, reasonable system? Now, obviously, this isn't a crime on the scale of the atom bomb, but if you care about democracy and freedom, it seems like it's worth thinking about. And if you're really interested in not doing any harm, there are all alternatives. Instead of working for Twitter and Facebook, you could go work for Mozilla and Wikipedia. You could work for these organizations that are thinking actively about this problem and trying to do better. Now, no organization is perfect. Nobody's found the perfect solution for all of this, but we can always try and minimize the harm we can do. We can always try and do better. Now, what about actively trying to do good? Remember my story from before about the shell script sorcery. What's striking is how rare this sort of thing really is. How many people are there doing the equivalent of opening 100 image files, and nobody comes across their desk to tell them how to do it better. So that brings us to question 3, the sorcerer's apprentice. Sorcerer's. Is it O or E? All right. There we go. So one of the key freedoms of free software, if you take it seriously, is the ability to modify the program. But I think part of the reason free software hasn't really appealed to people outside geeks is because it's not a freedom most people can really take advantage of. If you're not a programmer, what good is the ability to modify the program to you? You know, you still end up opening and saving those files as PNGs if you're an average person, whether you're using the GIMP or Photoshop. Now, the standard response to this from the free software community has been, well, it's a delegable freedom. Even if you personally can't modify the software, even if you can't add the things you want, you can hire somebody who knows how to do it and have them do it for you. But maybe you know different people than I do, but I can't think of anybody who has ever actually hired a programmer to make a change for them to solve a problem in their daily life. And so I wonder why that is. I was thinking about it, and I think the crucial reason is that the average person has no idea how to hire a programmer. I mean, even people who run startups don't have a great idea how to hire a programmer. One of the most popular posts on my blog is called How to Hire a Programmer. And people continually write in saying, like, wow, this was so helpful. I had no idea how to hire a programmer. And they're usually not people who have problems with PaintShop Pro. So why is this? Why is it so difficult? Part of the problem, surely, is that programmers are just in high demand. Most of the good ones work for big startups, and there are a handful of independent contractors, but they all charge ridiculously high rates. But I don't think that can be the whole story. There are a lot of programmers outside of the circle of programmers who are in really high demand. There are students just getting started, or people on their way out, or people who don't want a full-time job and want to work part-time, or people whose programming skills are decent but not great enough to really be able to build things on their own. And there's all sorts of people who might be looking for little bits of work here and there, even if they don't want to get into a big project. And so the question is, why is there no market for those people? And I think what we see is a sort of market failure here. Most non-programmers just don't know how to hire a programmer, and most programmers who want this kind of work, there's no reasonable place they can go. Even if they wanted to do it completely for free, even if they just love that joy of being swept up in an interesting problem, it's really hard to find interesting problems. It's weird. There are a lot of people with problems that would save them a lot of time. There are a lot of people who would really enjoy saving other people a lot of time. I mean, it's a really fulfilling feeling watching this person not have to save 100 files. And yet there's nobody bringing them together. And so I think what would be useful is a site like Stack Overflow, where people with problems and people with a couple minutes to solve problems could come together. And maybe you'd add some eBay-like features on top. So you'd have reputation to be able to trust people. You'd be able to contract for a couple hours worth of work if it was a more difficult problem. You know, I think it would be an interesting site. People, you might say there's sites like Elance and Rent-A-Coda that do this sort of thing, but they're all designed as tools for the professional. They're too intimidating for the average person who just has a simple problem. And so I think there's a real market niche here for a site that's able to aim at the non-programmer and introduce them to a programmer who can solve their problem for them. All right, so helping people save time scrapbooking is all well and good. That's 2.5. But what about solving a real social problem? I'm pretty skeptical of the sort of techno-utopians who say we can solve the world's problems through better code. There are certainly some places where code can help. The other week I saw a conference of crisis mappers, these programmers who go into crisis zones like Haiti after the earthquake or places like that, and they work on mapping tools. They use GPS to map the emerged location. They print out maps and give them to the rescue workers. They introduce people who have lost someone and people who are lost. They build databases of information and support, and they build a communications infrastructure so they can coordinate all of these efforts. And that's some really impressive stuff, real impressive example of where programming can make a real difference. But the vast majority of what people try and do, I don't find quite as convincing. You know, the classic example of a programmer trying to solve a social problem is probably the transparency movement. So people say, oh man, Congress is really corrupt, and I have a really great computer. How can I use the computer to solve this problem? And the typical way they do it is they say, oh, well, I'll just download all this data about all of the contributions that members of Congress get, and I'll put it up on the web, and have really nice visualizations and charts. And millions of dollars has been spent on this project. There are lots of nice visualizations and charts, and I think it's fair to say it hasn't made a single difference to any member of Congress. But I am going to give you one example of something not as big as saving Congress, but something important that you can do right here at your own school. It just requires you willing to get your shoes a little bit muddy. By virtue of being students at a major U.S. university, I assume that you have access to a wide variety of scholarly journals. Pretty much every major university in the United States pays these sort of licensing fees to organizations like JSTOR and Thomson and ISI to get access to scholarly journals that the rest of the world can't read. And these licensing fees are substantial, and they're so substantial that people who are studying in India instead of studying in the United States don't have this kind of access. They're locked out from all of these journals. They're locked out from our entire scientific legacy. I mean, a lot of these journal articles, they go back to the Enlightenment. Every time someone has written down a scientific paper, it's been scanned and digitized and put in these collections. That is a legacy that has been brought to us by the history of people doing interesting work, the history of scientists. It's a legacy that should belong to us as a commons, as a people, but instead it's been locked up and put online by a handful of for-profit corporations who then try and get the maximum profit they can out of it. Now, there are people, good people, trying to change this with the open access movement. So all journals going forward, they're encouraging them to publish their work as open access, open on the internet, available for download by everybody, available for free copying and perhaps even modification with attribution and notice. But even if we were somehow able to solve this problem, even if every journal from this day forward were an open access journal, that still leaves the problem of everything going back. Everything up to now, all of those journals, all that scientific legacy going back to the Enlightenment, that's still behind locked gates. But you have a key to those gates. And with a little bit of shell script magic, you can get those journal articles. You can download copies of them. And once you have a copy, theoretically, you could make it available to everyone. And if you don't know how to make it available to everyone without getting caught, you can go to guerrillaopenaccess.com and find my mailing address. And hard drives that get sent there will find their way online. Feel free to visit the website using Tor if you want to protect your anonymity. Same goes for any other caches of data you guys may have that need to find a gentle home. Scanned books, perhaps. I mean, this isn't the biggest problem in the world, but I think we should understand this is a serious problem. In the same way that people did civil disobedience, broke the rules for the civil rights movement, there are people who now chain themselves to nuclear power plants to prevent the Earth from imploding. It's actually a serious problem that the vast majority of the planet doesn't have access to our accumulated scientific knowledge. And I think it might be worth a little bit of shell scripting and breaking a couple rules to solve that problem. Well, I mean, so there's a couple problems, right? One of it is that it's often public funded, right? It's often taxpayer money that went to this stuff that then got locked up. But a lot of it, the vast majority of it is people who are dead, right? People who could not possibly be incentivized to do any more science, even if somehow the journals magically paid them for their journal articles, which they don't, right? So it's money going to journals on behalf of people who are dead that is all doing research that was paid for by the government and the public. So this brings up the question, okay, if you do have this large cache of data, how do you get it online? Now, for big stuff, we've kind of solved the problem of putting stuff online that people don't want to be online. The Pirate Bay and BitTorrent have been a fairly successful solution. There's a lot of stuff on the Pirate Bay that people don't want online, and for the most part, you can download it pretty quickly, and it doesn't get really taken down. Part of that is thanks to Sweden's laws, but part of that is also just thanks to the effectiveness of swarm protocols like BitTorrent. But why doesn't this work for smaller stuff? Why don't we see, we see movies on BitTorrent, but we don't see music. We don't see YouTube videos. We don't see academic papers. And I think this comes from the logic of BitTorrent. For something to work on BitTorrent, it has to be quite big, right? I mean, the whole point of the system is to download big files quickly. And once something is big and a lot of people download it, you have a lot of mirror seeds, and so then it's much easier to download it faster. But if you imagine you have a big corpus like a collection of papers, and people only want to download a couple of papers, it's much harder to see this process working. So if someone downloads one or two papers, even if they stay online for a while, the first person who has the huge collection of papers, if they go off, the vast majority of the collection is going to go offline. And similarly, this means you have problems with anonymity, right? If you're the one person with every paper, and there are a couple scattered people around who have one or two papers, it's pretty obvious who the person that you should try and shut down is. By contrast, if there are 300 people, all of whom have a copy of The Phantom Menace being uploaded, it's not obvious that you can just shut down one person, right? It's not obvious who is responsible, who you should go after. Everybody's pretty much reasonable. And you can extend this logic. You can see why BitTorrent has problems on the long tail. So if you want a popular movie, it's pretty accessible on BitTorrent. But if you want something more obscure, it's not really. And I think it's the same logic at work. If you're the one person making it available, you're an easy target on BitTorrent. So you rarely see things with just one or two seeds. Those people tend to disappear and go away, and then that file is gone forever. So what do we do about this? Well, here's another program that you can work on if you actually want to solve real problems. It's a little program called Tor. Hopefully some of you have heard of it, but the basic idea behind Tor is it's an anonymity system for the internet. Right now, if you want to connect to somebody on the internet, you have an IP address, they have an IP address, you send packets labeled with your from address and their to address, and it gets routed through the network in the simplest path possible and gets out the other side. What Tor does is it makes this a little more complicated. Instead of sending it directly to the other person, there are a whole bunch of computers in the Tor network. And what it does is it builds an encrypted circuit between a handful of computers such that each computer only knows the previous node on the Tor network and the next node on the Tor network. And so it bounces from one computer to a second computer to a third computer and then ultimately to its final destination. Now, because it bounces through so many computers, each individual computer only knows the person before it and the person after it. And they don't know what their point in the process is, and they don't know all of the other nodes in the network. So it's impossible for any one person in the Tor network to be able to connect the person making the request with the person getting it. All they know is data came in from one person, they passed it on to somebody else. Now, this is really important for anonymity. And of course, there's all sorts of reasons you may want to be anonymous on the internet. Now, anonymity in the United States goes back to our founding documents. The Federalist Papers, the defense of the Constitution, was published anonymously. And anonymity is protected by our First Amendment for all sorts of very good reasons. There's lots of stuff you might want to say on the internet that you don't want your name attached to, whether you're afraid of retribution, whether you're afraid of someone tracking down a source. Journalists use Tor, the US military uses Tor, all sorts of people use Tor for completely reasonable reasons. But Tor is also being used in a new way now, and one of the reasons the US State Department has started supporting it. Tor is being used in repressive regimes where the First Amendment doesn't exist to allow people access to the internet. So in a country like China, where the internet is heavily censored and blocked, you can download a copy of Tor, and instead of just bouncing to a normal Tor node, you can bounce to what's called a bridge. And a bridge is a computer that goes in between you and the rest of the Tor network. And the idea is that everyone who wants to surf the internet in China can get a couple of these bridges, and hopefully if we give different bridges to each person, which requires us having enough bridges, then the Chinese government won't be able to detect all of them and shut them all down. The Chinese government will be able to get a couple, but there'll be a different couple from the ones that you or your friend or your neighbor gets. Now, obviously this system depends on A, there being a lot of people running Tor nodes, and B, there being a lot of people running bridges. So I call upon you, if you want to do something helpful, one great way to get started would be running the Tor software, running a Tor node, a Tor relay node, or a Tor bridge. You can set it so that it only uses a certain amount of bandwidth. You can set it so it only uses a certain amount of CPU. It's very flexible. You can put restrictions on what kind of use it can be. If you're worried about getting banned because people are doing bad stuff with your Tor node, you can just be one of the intermediate nodes, or you can just restrict it to certain points or certain IP addresses or certain ports. It's very flexible, but every little bit of people helps on all sorts of this whole range of interesting problems, from letting people in China surf the internet to letting journalists get information anonymously. But what's interesting for our case here is using Tor for anonymous publishing. Tor generally works in this mode for anonymous reading. It allows you to visit a web page anonymously by bouncing your web request through a bunch of different servers and then bouncing the response through the same path. So you can visit all sorts of web pages and nobody knows that you visited them. But what's more interesting is if you have something you want to publish yourself and you don't want anybody to know it's you that's publishing it. So Tor has this feature that allows it to kind of work in reverse, this feature called hidden services. And the way it works is instead of issuing a request to some other place, what you can do is advertise yourself by setting up a circuit to what's called a rendezvous point. So you pick some node in the middle of the network, you set up this 3-hop path to that node. This lets you send packets over it. And then you ask other people who want to visit you to visit that anonymous node in the middle of the network. Now that node doesn't know who you are. The other people accessing that node don't know who you are. But nonetheless, requests into that node are able to filter through the Tor network and get back to you. The problem is, if you want to talk to that node, you have to talk using the Tor protocol, and that means you have to download the Tor software, which most people won't do, and so it's kind of a problematic way of publishing. You can publish totally securely, totally anonymously, but only to a very small subset of the people who use the internet. And so that is why I am working on a project called Tor to Web. And the way Tor to Web works is that instead of going to something through the Tor network, you go to whatever the URL is, .tortoweb.com. And the Tor to Web proxy servers, they take your request and proxy it into the Tor network. So they convert it from the normal HTTP protocol into the encrypted protocol that Tor uses, get the response from Tor, and then present it back out to you on the wider internet. And this means that pretty much any site that's protected through Tor that's using this anonymous service is instantly available to everybody with a web browser. And because it's not hosting any of the content itself, it's just a proxy between the two, it's protected by all the laws in the United States that protect ISPs and routers. Obviously, we wouldn't want to criminalize an ISP just because people were using its routers to download stuff that was illegal. And similarly, those laws apply to the router of Tor to Web, which is just routing traffic between the wider internet and the encrypted internet of Tor. So I think this is a promising technique for anonymous publishing of small files in the same way that BitTorrent has kind of solved the problem of anonymous publishing of big files. But I've thought about other ways of doing it, other ways of speeding it up, and certainly I would welcome your input and welcome your thoughts on these problems, but I'd also welcome your help improving the Tor network and improving Tor to Web. Finally, our fourth and final story. What about solving the actual social issues? What about the larger policy questions that affect everyone instead of just problems that you can solve with your own computer? I'll end with one more concrete example. I think the programmers tend to understand the First Amendment better than most people because we deal in bits. The thing about bits is that computers can't tell what they say. They may be a poem, they may be porn. If we think back to our router that's just moving packets across the internet, billions of bits are flying through it. It doesn't have time to sit and inspect all of those, figure out what they are, figure out even if they may be encrypted and decrypt them. It doesn't have time to look at them. Instead, it just copies a file from one place to another. And so, as we've seen, it's very difficult when you've built these systems that copy bits from one place to another. The whole systems that are architected on the notion of copying bits without looking at them, it's very difficult to suddenly change tack all of a sudden and say, no, these bits aren't acceptable. You may remember the Dvd Encryption Key was caught. This was a key that was used to encrypt Blu-ray discs, and having it would allow you to decrypt, what? HD DVD? That's true. There's But if there was a famous social experience around the HD DVD case where there was this one string that would allow you to decrypt all HD DVDs made up to then, and people distributed it through all sorts of mechanisms. They made it the title of their news article, they put it on blog posts, they posted it in comments to other people's blogs, they made YouTube videos with it. There's a hilarious Lost video where people were repeating it over and over again. There were songs about it. There were all sorts of mechanisms of getting these bits out. People printed it on T-shirts, right? It was impossible to stop this string of characters from being spread. That's just not how the internet was set up. That's the kind of thing I think the First Amendment is meant to protect, and we can separate that from the kinds of things the First Amendment doesn't protect, the kind of places where you can criminalize speech, because what you're criminalizing is not the phrase, but the social context in which the phrase exists. Take fraud, for example. If I tell you that inside this box I have a bridge and you can buy it for $20, and then you open the box and realize there's no bridge inside, well, you can sue me for fraud, and I can't say, oh, the First Amendment protects my right to say there's a bridge in a box, because that's not what's being protected. I can make all the T-shirts I want that say there's a bridge in this box, right? Nobody's going to try and take those T-shirts away or shut down my blog or stop those comments. What they're trying to stop is me misleading you, me in a social context using words to cause something to happen. They're criminalizing the act and not the speech itself. Unfortunately, members of Congress don't always take the First Amendment quite so seriously. I don't think they understand it quite as well. And right now, Hollywood is pushing them to pass a bill called COICA, which would, in my opinion, be a serious violation of the First Amendment. What the bill would do is it would set up a new category of website called the category is called dedicated to infringing activity, which is defined really broadly. It's basically any website where infringement is found to be central to the activity of the website and it doesn't have any other significant commercial purpose. And what the bill allows is for the Attorney General to go and get a court order shutting down such websites even without proving that the websites themselves have committed any crime. So if you think about, for example, YouTube early on, before everybody had a webcam and a video camera and video cameras on their phones, most of what was uploaded to YouTube was copyrighted material. Now you can imagine a judge going and saying, look, as Viacom in fact tried to do, look, this website, it has no significant commercial purpose other than copyright infringement. It should be banned. Now they couldn't do that now because YouTube itself has committed no crime. Under the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, if you tell YouTube there's copyrighted material and they take it down, YouTube is immune from liability. You can't sue them because as soon as they found out about the copyright infringement, they put an end to it. Now, somebody else is guilty. Somebody else made that copy. They put it online. They can be held responsible. But YouTube themselves is immune. This law would overturn that principle. It would say any website where there is this significant level of infringement can be shut down even if the website itself has committed no crime. And I think that's a pretty clear violation of the First Amendment. I think, and courts in similar cases have found this, you can't shut down an entire website just because of something that other people have used it for. You can imagine the kind of slippery slope that might happen here. So think about WikiLeaks, for example. Pretty much everything is copyrighted, so pretty much everything on WikiLeaks is copyrighted material. And you can kind of imagine saying, well, there's no commercially significant purpose to WikiLeaks other than posting copyrighted material. Right? I mean, every bit of money that WikiLeaks gets, it gets from publishing copyrighted material. And so you can imagine going to a judge and asking them to issue this order shutting WikiLeaks down. And once you've found that you have this effective system for shutting things down, you can imagine the government wanting to expand it to be broader and broader. I mean, everybody who has something on the internet they don't like, they would say, oh, look, the Attorney General has this list of websites Americans can't visit. Let's add new things to that list. It's a dangerous, slippery slope. And it also has dangerous technical implications. So if you look at the bill, the way it's set up, the way it actually blocks these sites is it creates a new rule that any ISP that operates a DNS server has to modify their DNS server to check to see if a domain name you're trying to visit is on the blacklist. And if it's on the blacklist, it can't respond with the DNS records. Now, if you know anything about the way DNS works, it's based on caching, and that caching is based on trust. It's based on trust that a server gives you the right answer, you can trust and save that result. Now, you can imagine if US servers are required by law to start giving the wrong results, nobody is going to be able to trust US servers, and the entire world DNS infrastructure is going to have to route around the United States. Every time anyone interesting is going to make a DNS request, they're going to have to make it of a server that's not in this country, that's not obeyed by this laws. And what you'll end up having is a fragmented DNS system. You'll have one set of responses that are okay to give to people in the US, and one set of responses that are okay for every other country. So if this bill is so bad, why does Congress keep pushing it? Well, I've talked to some staffers in congressional offices, and the sense basically seems to be, I mean, they won't say this outright, but Hollywood is really pushing this hard. Hollywood, of course, donates enormous quantities of money to pretty much every member of Congress. Those members rely on Hollywood fundraisers to fund their campaigns, and if Hollywood comes to them and says they want this bill done, they're inclined to go along with it. And so, unfortunately, what we've seen is this bill just racing through Congress. They originally planned to pass it all in 1 week, run it through the Senate. Thanks to a huge outcry that we helped sponsor, that was slowed down, but now they're planning to pass it when the Senate comes back November 15th. So if you want to do just one small thing you can do is go to our website, demandprogress.org/blacklist, and sign our petition trying to stop this bill. We've been using this. It's been very influential in talking to members of Congress that there is an outcry, that there are people who actually care about this, that it isn't just a normal standard copyright bill that Hollywood is trying to push through, that they really shouldn't question too carefully. I think I'm almost at time for questions. So I'll wrap up by saying, as programmers, we all have amazing power, And with great power comes great responsibility. I hope that all of you will use your power wisely, think more carefully about what it is accomplishing and whether it could accomplish something greater. And I hope that we can all try to do something better with what we have. Thanks. Sure. No questions? Come on. All right.
This is kind of tangential to the names that you're going to make. But have you ever read Stephen Yeatt's Wizard Schools?
I don't think so.
It kind of takes your programmer wizard analogy to its extreme.
What's it called?
Wizard Schools.
Wizard Schools?
So, like, it always one of those things, it's like 100 pages long.
Yeah, this is my problem with I get like the first page and then I'm like, oh, I need to get back to work. But I will try and save it. Yep, okay.
Yeah, I have two things to say, actually. Number one is, what do you think about, free software? Wasn't choice. Like Apple, and you mentioned Google, Gmail. And I think a lot of times what happens is people want to be evil. It's very easy to point your finger at an evil corporation and people want to have it private. But on the other hand, they're making everybody's lives. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that. A lot of that has to do with usability too, right? Apple's a very good example, of course, and then with iPod, right? Very private, very proprietary, and you can imagine an open source version, while being very pleasing and satisfying to a programmer,
So the question was, how do we balance the freedoms with the ease of use that we get from some proprietary projects like Mac and Windows? No, I think that's the reason why so many people use proprietary software. I mean, it's the reason I use Gmail is because it's easier to use. It lets me get through my email faster than Mutt. And, you know, for the average person, I think there's no problem making those practical decisions. I'm not like Stallman where I say I'm only going to use software that's painful to me to encourage me to make these social changes to make it less painful for everyone else. I mean, I certainly admire what he does and I appreciate that, but I don't think that's the choice that's incumbent upon most of us. I think the choice that's incumbent upon us is in our role as programmers. In our role at working at Google, we could say we can use our talents to make this proprietary software more easy to use, more featureful, or we can use those talents to make an equivalent piece of free software more easy to use. And so people will have that additional ease of use, but they'll also have the freedom that comes with it. And obviously, it's not a perfect trade-off. You know, Gmail is head and shoulders above the equivalent free software email client. So obviously, something that you work on at Gmail making it easier to use is probably going to help more people than if you make Mutt slightly easier to use. But I think, you know, it's a question we actually have to grapple with and think about and weigh the benefits and differences. And if, you know, you seriously try and objectively take that critical distance and weigh the benefits and differences and think you can make a better difference, more change in the world by improving Gmail, I think that's a reasonable choice. But what I'm trying to say is that's a decision that you should come to after evaluating the question. It's not something you should just assume, oh, you know, nobody uses free software, so let's just ignore it. Oh, sorry.
So I understand and agree that journal papers should be free. Following that, there was a discussion of using BitTorrent for Canon minutes. Is the implication meant to be that all movies should be free?
So I'm not saying that all journal articles should be free or that all movies should be free. I certainly think for public domain journal articles, for journal articles before 1923 where there's no copyright even anymore, that they just charge you to get this even though there's no copyright law that allows them to keep hold on it, and so it's just contract law. I think it's reasonable to do a little bit of civil disobedience and break that contract in exchange for putting it into the public domain forever. In the case of movies, you know, I think it's much less clear. There are people who have thought more about this question than I that say we need to strike a better balance on copyright law. I tend to think we've reached a point where copying technology has become so prevalent that everybody has copying devices in their pockets, in front of them, at their houses, at their offices, that now copyright law has actually become in serious tension with the First Amendment. If you imagine when copyright law was first created, it was a business regulation. It was a restriction on people with printing presses. And what it basically said was not you can only use your printing press to print certain types of things. It said if you're going to print this thing and sell it, you've got to give the money back to the original author. You can't just pocket it for yourself. And I think that was a reasonable deal to make. It was reasonable in the same way I think it's reasonable to have rules against fraud, to have this kind of economic regulation that says the people who publish things ought to get the benefits of the money that's made publishing their stuff. What I think is unreasonable is this sort of automatic extension of that to not just people who own printing presses and run publishing companies, but everybody who has a phone or a laptop. And I think, you know, the personal individual question of whether to pay for a copy of The Phantom Menace or download it, I think that's, you know, that's a reasonable question to ask and one I struggle with myself. But the legal question of whether we should criminalize all tools for distributing The Phantom Menace, I think that one is pretty clear, and I think we should develop software that allows people to distribute big files and small ones. So what
Not exactly the tools by any means. I think that's what I'm getting at is that it's hard. It's a trade-off, basically. At the point of if you're going to end up depriving the dollars that would have bought arms loaded for the baby.
Well, you know, people can save their $3 on the movie ticket and donate it to Oxfam. So you can get the dollars either way. I think it's, you know, I think it's a longer and interesting question. I'd be happy to engage with you whether it makes sense for people to pay for The Phantom Menace or not. But what I was trying to get at in this talk was simply we have reasonably effective technology for distributing large files, and if you're interested in freedom of speech, the technology to work on is the technology for distributing small files. What to use that technology on, what files to distribute, I think is a more interesting question along the lines you outlined. Yep. A little bit. I mean, I have some friends who are on the board and things like that. I've gone to some of their events and their conferences. They're a great group. I certainly wasn't trying to demean them in any way by using the, you know, something like their name for the title of the talk. But I think a lot of the questions that I'm talking about here are a little bit broader than the questions that they usually deal with. So they're great on issues of privacy and, you know, they've done some great work on policy stuff like this. They probably will help us fight this COICA bill. But on the larger questions of free software and copyright law and things like that, they haven't been quite so vocal and quite so active. Thank you for coming out. Yeah. So for those of you who ignore my advice and go on to create Facebook and make billions of dollars, when you give $100 million to a public school system somewhere, please also donate $100 million to the CSPR. Okay.
Just to go back to kind of the can your grandmother use it analogy, you're talking about how there's the supply and demand problem between like coders and people who have simple problems. But I've been doing some work at a local, elderly home, and just helping people there learn how to use computers. And I think a lot of people really just don't even understand that they can modify computers. So do you think, education could help in that area a lot more, or do you really think it's just the fact that it's like a market that hasn't evolved?
So the question was, he said he spends a lot of time working with elderly people who have trouble using computers. And with them, it's not even like, oh, I don't know how to hire a programmer. It's like, I don't even realize this box can be modified. Like, I took it out. I can't modify my toaster oven. Why would I be able to modify this? And can education help with that? That's a great point. I totally agree. I think, the same way we all laughed about the person using PaintShop Pro to change the image format, I think we have trouble empathizing sometimes with someone who's just seen a computer for the first time And I think you're right. It's natural to just treat it the same way they treat everything else in their life, right? Nobody says, oh, I wish my VCR had a better font, right? It's just not something you think about being able to modify the things in your life in the same way you don't think about, I wish my floor would just scrub itself. So I think it's true we need to do education, but I think education could also follow from having this opportunity, right? If there was a service out there that introduced people to folks who could change things for them, then you could advertise that service. And then it would be something concrete. You could say, look, not only is it theoretically possible to change this, but practically here's how. Whereas right now, if we were just to go around saying like, oh yeah, theoretically, if you knew how to hire a programmer, you could hire a programmer to change this thing, it's a much more complicated case to make to someone who, isn't quite there, even at the theoretical level of understanding what it is a computer is. Yep. So the question was, can we assume that Tor's positive uses will always outweigh its shadier uses, or will at some point the shadier uses of Tor outweigh the benefits of giving people anonymity? It's definitely an interesting question. I mean, I'm tempted to quote George W. Bush, who said that freedom is messy. It's a difficult dividing line where we say, okay, if we give people this freedom, they'll abuse it, so let's just not give them this freedom at all. Do we have to decide in advance whether the harms of freedom will outweigh the benefits? I think with tools like Tor, where it's a tool that protects a principle like anonymity, a principle that, as I say, goes back to our founding documents, I think it's reasonable to say we need to protect that principle even if we don't know for sure, even if it turns out to be wrong that it ends up doing more harm than good. I think one of the things about freedom is you never know when it will come in to be crucial. You never know what the moment is, what the freedom of speech is that ends up making a huge point in the debate. It could happen that for years and years, all Tor is used for is child pornography and, kidnapping or something, right? And then one day it gets used to release the next version of the Pentagon Papers and causes a huge revolution in government that, ends this pointless war and saves millions of lives in the process. And I think on questions of basic freedom like this, we have to kind of hope that at some point the freedom will be used the right way and that the benefits will outweigh the harms, because it's impossible for us to sit and do that judgment now ahead of time and figure out whether it's worth the cost.
I'm pretty sure the British didn't think the American colony version of freedom was very applicable to what they had in mind. It's all a matter of perspective.
Yep, in the purple.
I was wondering, do you think that, pushing this demand progress idea, as a concept of First Amendment is kind of a troublesome idea because of, for instance, the FCC is a clear violation of that as well, but it also very kind of sets the standard of how we can, modify tech, or how we can misunderstand technology and its actual purpose. Do you think there have to be, some troubles trying to say it's a First Amendment violation? Can Congress also be well, it's also a violation of this amendment that we care much more about?
So I'm not totally sure I understand the question. He's saying there's something we like that also violates this First Amendment?
I think there might be a huge problem, if this bill gets passed and we claim First Amendment violation, do you think organizations like the FCC can counter that and say, hey, it kind of serves the same purpose? The reason the FCC is created is to censor content going through it from other technology that people don't want to see or have spread. Do you think this will pose a big problem, or do you think it'll filter through another law somehow?
So the question was, do I think the First Amendment will actually stop this bill? Or do I think people will say a First Amendment that's this wide would shut down a whole bunch of other things like the FCC? So on the particular example of the FCC, if we go back to my notion about the T-shirts versus the box, the way the FCC works is not that they go around, as far as I know, the FCC has never declared that you can't say fuck on your iPhone. What they've declared is that you can't say fuck on public radio. And the justification, the reason the Supreme Court said that was consistent with the First Amendment was because there were only a handful of radio stations it's reasonable to set community standards for what's on them in a way that it's not reasonable if everybody has their own individual device and can access what they want. But on the larger question, I think you're right. I think we shouldn't trust the First Amendment to stop bad laws. As far as I know, the Supreme Court has never struck down a copyright law on First Amendment grounds. And while I hope they would strike down this one if it's passed, I wouldn't want to count on this being the first time. And so I think it's important that we stop it in the legislature, that we stop it by signing these petitions, calling your senator, acting out now, so that we don't have to have a long, drawn-out court fight later. That wasn't a Copyright Act. Anyone who hasn't asked a question yet? Oh, sorry. Thanks.
I have a question. Actually, I have a very, very good friend who works in the work. He's actually working on something. He hands out bridges.
Uh-huh.
And we actually discovered that what happens is that China finds these bridge servers and blocks them as well. So it's sort of like just one level removed. And we were actually trying to solve this problem. We realized it was way too big of a problem to bite off. It's fundamental. They're censoring all information. Whatever they find, they block. And when he asked the guy he was working for before, he was basically told that's not our problem to solve. We're not trying to solve censorship in China. We're trying to make bridges available. Do you think that is in agreement with Bohr's philosophy?
I guess I'm not totally sure I understand what went on there.
So he works on the bridge server, which hands out bridges when requested.
Right. So
And so what's happening now in China is that
they block the server that distributes the
they block the
bridges.
service he's working on.
So my understanding is that the idea behind, all right, so the way bridges work in Tor, right, is in China you manage to get a copy of Tor, and then you need to talk to a bridge server to be able to get introduced to the Tor network. And so there's this website, bridges.torproject.org, where based on your IP address, it'll give you 2 or 3 bridges. And you're saying that they blocked that website.
Yes.
But the nice thing about, again, is the bridges, it's just an IP address. It's the kind of thing that can fit on a T-shirt. So you can imagine people writing them out on a piece of paper and handing it to someone, people IMing them, people posting it on their Facebook wall. And so I think part of the hope is that we'll be able to develop enough alternative mechanisms for getting these bridges out that even if they block the obvious place, like the web server and the email account, people will be able to spring up and build alternatives in social networks. Boing Boing could post a bridge at the top of its page. I know Bram Cohen is working on technology to embed bridges stenographically inside otherwise nice-seeming websites.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my question was more that what he was told was to not believe that their goal was not to solve the censorship problem in China, but
I guess.
I don't know if that, maybe I'm completely wrong. Maybe they were just like covering their own ass.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to comment on a third-hand attack on the Tor project, but I mean, what I will say is that this is an interesting question, right? It's definitely a difficult one. There's a cat and mouse game that's going on with China, and if somebody wants an interesting problem to work on that also could make a real difference, this is definitely one of them, where there's all sorts of interesting ways you can think about this question of how do we get these addresses out such that China can't censor them, but also that they can't get all of them. So it's this weird balance between making the bridges available, but also not making them too available. So I hope your account of it isn't true, because I certainly think they've been doing great work along those lines. And if it is true, then all the more reason other people should help out and try and solve those problems.
So how do you talk to politicians about this when you kind of affect policy? Because a typical politician does not have a degree in computer science. So a lot of the arguments that you give to a technical audience just aren't going to work for them.
Yeah, so the question was, how do we talk to politicians about this bill, since the technical arguments that we give won't make sense to people who don't have backgrounds in computer science, which is the entire U.S. Congress and their staff. It's a great question. The way we've been doing it, and I'd love suggestions on how to do this better, is one, we use all the classic fallacies, right? We use argument from authority. So Tim Berners-Lee and the people who Vince CERN, like all the people who created the internet say this is really a bad idea because it'll break things, right? And like, you don't know how it works, but these people who do know, they're saying you're breaking it. So that's one way we try and get at them. Another is we say, look, this is not what you think it is. This was presented to you, and in all the press releases, Hollywood says, oh, this is just another copyright bill. It's just going to increase our power to shut down copyright infringing websites. And we say, no, this isn't a copyright bill. This is a censorship bill. It would be the first real censorship system in the United States, modular like Communications Decency Act. It would literally change the way the internet works in the U.S. You would have a system where you could visit a website in Mexico, you could visit a website in Canada, but as soon as you cross the border in the United States, we'd try and keep you from visiting that website. That just doesn't make sense. That goes way too far. That's beyond what they've sold you this bill is. Those have been the two arguments I've been using the most. They seem to be somewhat effective, but if other people have ideas on how to translate this, I'm certainly open to them. Anyone else? Sorry? Someone suggests we only elect computer scientists.
Have you run into any of the congressmen who are like a lot more technically inclined who sort of get it, or do they just totally not understand the computer science argument?
So, we've been right now it's trying to get through a committee in the Senate. So we've been focusing on the Judiciary Committee of Senators right now. So maybe once it gets wider, we'll be able to talk to congressmen who have a better understanding. But at the moment, we haven't had any such luck. Are we out of time? All right. I mean, I can hang out here, but if people want to go, it seems like people will take it. All right, one more question?
What makes demand progress's petitions different from petition online? Is it that you work directly with the officials?
So the question was, why is signing this petition different from just signing a random petition on Petition Online? And yeah, it's that we're trying to mobilize the people who sign the petition to call their senators, to take other actions. We're working in districts to get people to show up at town halls and things like that. And B, we also, we have a presence on the Hill. We're talking to senators and their staffs, and we're able to go to them and say, look, so many people have signed in your district saying this is a problem. It backs up all of, it allows us to get meetings, and it backs up all of our lobbying effort to say we have a group of actual voters behind us. Yeah? We're good? Thanks.